She was pushed into the dish room. Her hands barely touched the soapy water when a manager barked in front of everyone. "If those glasses aren't spotless, you're not getting paid." No one looked at her twice. Her wrinkled blouse and assistant badge made everyone assume she was just help. But what they didn't know was that the woman scrubbing champagne glasses was actually the wife of the man who funded the $1 million gala. And just hours later, she would walk onto the stage as the guest of honor in front of the very people who had ordered her around. The air in Palm Springs that night was warm, heavy with the scent of desert blooms and expensive perfume. The gala was in full swing at the luxury resort, a sprawling place with crystal chandeliers and marble floors that screamed money. Claire Evans stood quietly in the grand hall, her white blouse a little wrinkled from the drive, her black trousers plain but neat. Her hair was pulled back in a tidy ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry, except a simple gold band on her left hand. She carried a tote bag, the kind you'd see a teacher lugging, not a guest at a high-profile fundraising gala. The badge pinned to her shirt read Bennett Foundation, assistant a borrowed pass she'd grabbed to blend in to move through the crowd without drawing eyes. But it didn't work. People noticed her, not for who she was, but for who they thought she wasn't. The room buzzed with billionaires, politicians, and celebrities all decked out in haute couture, sipping Dom Perignon like it was water. The grand hall was the heart of it all, a glittering stage where reputations were built and deals were whispered. Upstairs, the second floor held private meeting rooms where the real power plays happened. The rooftop, that was the VIP zone where the elite laughed under string lights, their voices carrying over the desert night. Claire didn't care about any of that. She'd come to observe, to support her husband's foundation, to be present without being seen. But being invisible came at a cost. A woman in a shimmering gold gown, her hair piled high with diamond pins, waved a manicured hand in Claire's direction. Water. No ice. Hurry." Her voice was sharp, like she was used to being obeyed. Margaret, the wife of a state senator, had a face that said she'd never been told no. Her lips curled as she glanced at Claire's badge, then her outfit. Claire stood still for a moment, her fingers tightening around the strap of her tote bag. "I'm not part of the staff, ma'am," she said, her voice calm, polite but firm. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Wearing a staff badge and not serving. Useless." The women around her, rich, polished their dresses worth more than most people's cars, exchanged looks. One pursed her lips, her earrings glinting as she tilted her head. Another leaned in her voice, low but loud enough to carry. "Probably another charity clinger from a poor family," she muttered just as Claire turned away. Claire's shoes clicked softly on the marble floor as she moved toward a side table where a stack of programs for the evening sat untouched. She picked one up, flipping through it, her eyes scanning the list of donors. A man in a pinstripe suit, his tie loose and his breath heavy with whiskey, sidled up next to her. "Hey, you're not supposed to touch those," he said, his voice loud enough to draw eyes. "Those are for guests, not the help." He laughed, a harsh grating sound, and a few people nearby joined in their smirks, sharp as knives. Claire set the program down, her movements slow, deliberate. She looked at him, her eyes steady, unblinking. "I was just reading," she said quietly. The man snorted, leaning closer, his cologne overwhelming. "Reading? Sweetheart, you're here to clean up, not play guest." The group around him laughed louder, one woman fanning herself with a program as if the moment was too amusing to bear. Claire's jaw tightened just for a second before she turned and walked away, her tote bag swinging slightly at her side. Before the weight of the moment could settle, let's pause for just a second. If this story's hitting you, maybe you felt that kind of judgment, that sting of being looked down on. Open your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to keep sharing stories like this, stories that remind us we're not alone. All right, let's get back to Claire. Claire drifted toward the edge of the grand hall. Her steps measured, her eyes catching the flicker of a chandelier overhead. A group of young socialites, their dresses a riot of color and sequins, stood near a cocktail table, their laughter high and brittle. One of them, a woman with a pearl choker and a sneer, spotted Claire and nudged her friend. "Look at her carrying that bag like she's heading to a laundromat," she said, her voice slicing through the hum of the crowd. The others turned their eyes, raking over Claire's plain outfit. "Seriously, who let her in?" Another chimed in, her voice loud enough to make heads turn. "She looks like she's here to mop the floors." The group burst into giggles, one snapping a photo of Claire's back, her badge glinting under the lights. Claire paused, her hand resting on a nearby chair, her fingers tightening briefly. She didn't turn around. "I'm a guest," she said, her voice low but clear before walking away. The pearl choker woman scoffed, tossing her hair. "A guest? In that outfit?" "Sure, honey." The laughter followed Claire like a shadow, cold and relentless. She moved toward a quieter corner of the grand hall, hoping to catch her breaths. The live broadcast cameras swept through the room, capturing the sparkle of the gala, but Claire stayed out of their frame. She always did. Her life before this, before Alexander, before the quiet days in their desert home, had been one of high stakes and higher scrutiny. As COO of a European hotel chain, she'd run 3 7-star properties with a precision that made her a legend in the industry. But that was behind her now. She'd chosen a simpler life, one where she didn't need to prove anything. Or so she thought. As Claire stood near a tall vase of orchids, a young woman in a sequined dress, her voice dripping with condescension, approached. "Excuse me, can you move?" "You're blocking the view," she said, gesturing to the auction stage as if Claire were a piece of misplaced furniture. Claire stepped aside, her face calm, but the woman wasn't done. "Honestly, they should keep the staff out of sight," she said to her companion, a man with a Rolex that caught the light. "It's distracting having them linger like this." The man chuckled, his eyes raking over Claire's plain outfit. "Yeah, what's with the thrift store look? Did they hire her off the street?" The words cut through the air, and a few nearby guests turned their laughter sharp and cruel. Claire adjusted her badge, her fingers steady, and said, "I'm not staff." The woman rolled her eyes, tossing her hair. "Then why dress like one? This isn't a soup kitchen." The crowd's laughter grew a cold wave that made Claire's shoulders stiffen, though her face stayed serene. Backstage, where the staff buzzed like bees in a hive, Claire took a wrong turn. She was looking for the restroom, her tote bag slung over her shoulder, when a man in a black polo shirt, Brian the logistics supervisor, spotted her. His face was red, his clipboard shaking as he barked, "What are you standing around for? Get those champagne glasses washed now." Claire opened her mouth to correct him, but he was already turning away, shouting at someone else. A younger staffer, barely out of her teens, handed Claire a pair of rubber gloves. "New here." The girl whispered, her voice kind but tired. "This room reeks of bleach." Before Claire could respond, she was nudged into the industrial kitchen, a hot, steamy chaos of clanging trays and shouted orders. The dish room was a world apart from the glamour outside. Stainless steel counters, piles of dirty glasses, the sharp smell of cleaning chemicals. Claire stood there, gloves in hand, her blouse sticking to her back in the heat. A cook glanced at her, then looked away, assuming she belonged. She could have walked out. She could have said something, but instead she slipped on the gloves. Not because she had to, but because she knew what it was like to be in a room where no one listened. She'd been that young staffer once, years ago, before her family's name meant anything to her. So she started washing. Her hands moved quickly, efficiently, like they remembered the rhythm from her college days working catering gigs. Just as she stacked a clean glass, a waiter in a crisp white shirt stormed in, his face twisted with frustration. "You're too slow," he snapped, grabbing a tray from her hands and nearly knocking over a stack of plates. "This isn't a day spa, move it or you're out." The other staffers didn't look up, their heads down, their hands busy. But the waiter's voice carried, and a few snickered, their eyes darting to Claire's wrinkled blouse, her plain shoes. She paused, her hands still in the soapy water, and looked at him. "I'm doing my best," she said, her voice low even. The waiter scoffed, tossing the tray onto a cart. "Your best? Tell that to the guests waiting for their drinks. Pathetic." He stormed out, leaving the room heavy with his words. Claire's fingers curled slightly, but she kept washing her face, a mask of calm. Then the order system crashed. The kitchen went from chaos to pandemonium. Waiters shouted about missing trays. Bartenders couldn't find clean glasses. The head chef, a burly man with a beard, was screaming into a walkie-talkie. Claire set down a glass and stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand attention. She just started asking questions. How many trays are still out? Where's the bottleneck? The chef blinked at her, confused, but answered. Within minutes, Claire had rerouted the tray system, sent barbacks to clear the backlog, and redesigned the dishwashing flow. The kitchen started to hum. The chef stared at her, wiping sweat from his brow. "Who are you?" he asked, half laughing, half stunned. Claire shrugged, peeling off her gloves. "I used to run 3 7-star hotels. But tonight I'm just a guest." As Claire stepped out of the kitchen, a young bartender, his apron stained, caught her arm. "Hey, you were incredible back there. he said, his voice genuine, his eyes wide with admiration. "I don't know how you did it, but you saved us." He hesitated, then pulled out a small notebook from his pocket, flipping to a page with staff signatures. "Sign this. It's for the crew, kind of a tradition." Claire paused, her tote bag heavy on her shoulder, then took the pen. She wrote her name in neat, unassuming script, Claire Evans. The bartender grinned, unaware of the weight that name carried. "Thanks, Claire. You're one of us tonight." She nodded, her lips twitching into a faint smile, and slipped back into the grand hall, leaving the notebook behind, a quiet clue that would soon unravel everything. She slipped out of the kitchen, her blouse now damp, her badge slightly crooked. Back in the grand hall, the energy was electric. The auction was in full swing, millions being tossed around like pocket change. Claire found a corner buffet table, hoping to grab a bite and disappear into the crowd. She sat her tote bag at her feet and picked up a small plate of food. For a moment, she looked almost ordinary, like someone who'd wandered into the wrong room. A woman in a Givenchy gown, her face tight with Botox, approached. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "You're at the wrong table. This area is for official donors only." Claire looked up, her fork pausing midair. She didn't argue. She just stood, brushed a crumb from her trousers, and stepped aside. The woman leaned toward her friend, a man in a velvet jacket. Sneaking into a donor seat. "Some people have no idea where they belong," she said, loud enough for Claire to hear. Claire moved toward a side exit, her steps slow, her eyes catching the glint of a silver tray left unattended. A middle-aged man in a tuxedo, his face flushed from too much wine, blocked her path. "Hey you," he called, his voice slurring slightly. "Pick up that tray and bring it to my table. We're out of appetizers." He gestured vaguely toward a group of men laughing loudly, their ties loosened. Claire stopped, her tote bag heavy against her hip. "I'm not serving tonight," she said, her tone, even her eyes meeting his. The man laughed, a loud, mocking sound that drew attention. "Not serving? Then what's the point of you being here?" he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Go back to wherever you came from. This isn't your crowd." The men at his table roared with laughter, one slamming his glass down for emphasis. Claire's hand paused on her bag strap, her knuckles whitening briefly, but she stepped past him. Her face composed her silence, a shield. The words landed like a slap, but Claire's face didn't change. She picked up her tote bag, her movements slow and deliberate, and walked toward the edge of the room. A few heads turned, some smirking, others ignoring her entirely. She didn't look back. But as she passed a group of younger guests, one of them, a tech bro with slicked back hair, nudged his friend. "Check out the assistant trying to eat with the big dogs," he said, laughing. Claire's step didn't falter, but her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag just for a second. She kept moving, her eyes scanning the room, catching the glint of a camera lens in the distance. At the edge of the ballroom, Claire paused near a display of auction items, her eyes lingering on a small painting of a desert sunset. A woman in a red silk dress, her voice loud and performative, turned to her. "Oh, honey, don't bother looking at that," she said, her smile sharp as a blade. "That's a six-figure piece. You'd need to work 100 years to afford a glance." The group around her laughed, their voices blending into a cruel chorus. One man, his cufflinks flashing, leaned in. "She probably thinks it's a postcard," he said, winking at his friends. The laughter grew, and a few guests snapped photos, their phones angled to catch Claire's plain outfit against the opulent backdrop. She stood there, her hands still, her eyes fixed on the painting. "It's beautiful," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the noise. The woman in red snorted. "Sure, for someone with taste." Claire turned away, her shoulders straight, but her fingers brushed the edge of her wedding band, a quiet anchor in the storm. Then a ripple went through the crowd. Edward, the Gala's senior director, a wiry man in a tailored suit, hurried toward her. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something like panic. "Miss Claire," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I apologize, the VIP lounge on the rooftop is ready. Please head up whenever you're ready." The group nearby fell silent. Margaret, who'd ordered Claire to fetch water earlier, was standing a few feet away, her glass frozen halfway to her lips. "She's who?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Claire smiled, just a small curve of her lips. "I'm here with family," she said softly. "Don't trouble yourself." She turned and walked toward the staircase, her steps unhurried, leaving Margaret staring after her. As Claire reached the staircase, a junior event planner, her headset tangled in her hair, rushed up, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Miss Evans, I'm so sorry," she stammered, clutching a tablet. Your name was on the VIP list, but the system glitched and I didn't realize. She trailed off, her hands shaking. Claire looked at her, her expression soft but unyielding. It's all right, she said, her voice steady. Mistakes happen. The planner nodded, nearly dropping her tablet in relief, and scurried away. But as Claire ascended the stairs, the planner pulled up the guest list on her screen, her eyes widening at the name Claire Evans co-founder Bennett Foundation. She whispered to a colleague, "She's the one who funded the whole thing." The words spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of a few staffers nearby who exchanged stunned glances. The whispers started then. A young staffer, the same one who'd handed Claire the gloves, leaned toward a coworker. Did she just call the director by name? The question hung in the air unanswered. Upstairs, the rooftop lounge was quieter, the air cooler. String lights twinkled against the desert sky, and the guests here were different, less flashy, more powerful. Claire stood near the railing looking out over the city, her tote bag resting on a chair. She didn't mingle. She didn't need to. But the weight of the night was starting to settle on her shoulders. She touched the gold band on her finger, twisting it slightly, her eyes distant. Downstairs, a group of influencers, their phones always at the ready, spotted Claire's badge as she returned briefly to grab her forgotten wine glass. One of them, a woman with a fake tan and a designer clutch, laughed loudly. "Oh my God, an assistant up here. Did she get lost?" she said, her voice carrying across the rooftop. Her friends giggled, one filming the moment for their followers. "Look at her shoes," another chimed in, zooming in with her phone. "I bet she bought them at a discount store." The group erupted in laughter, their voices sharp and relentless. Claire set her glass down, her movements precise, and turned to face them. "I'm where I'm meant to be," she said, her tone, even her eyes, locking onto the woman's. The influencer faltered, her phone dipping slightly, but recovered with a smirk. "Sure, keep telling yourself that," she said, turning back to her friends, who laughed even harder. Claire walked away, her head high, but her fingers brushed the edge of her tote bag, a small grounding motion. A moment later, a senior board member of the Bennett Foundation, an older man with a kind face, approached Claire at the railing. He carried a glass of whiskey, his demeanor warm but respectful. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice low. "I heard what happened downstairs. I'm sorry you had to deal with that." He paused, then handed her a small card with the foundation's logo. "This is your seat number for the head table. We've been waiting for you." Claire took the card, her fingers lingering on the embossed letters. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. The man nodded, his eyes crinkling with a smile. "You've always had more grace than this crowd deserves," he said before walking away. The influencers nearby overheard their laughter dying as they exchanged uneasy glances, their phones now silent. Claire paused by a small table on the rooftop, her wine glass catching the soft glow of the string lights. A man in a flashy suit, his hair slicked back and his watch ostentatious, approached with a group of his peers trailing behind. "Hey, you're in the wrong spot," he said, his voice booming, drawing eyes from nearby guests. "The staff entrance is downstairs. This is for VIPs." He grinned, expecting applause from his friends, who obliged with loud chuckles. "Look at her, thinking she can just waltz up here," one of them added, his voice dripping with disdain. The man leaned closer, his breath heavy with champagne. "What did you sneak in for the free drinks?" The group's laughter was harsh, echoing across the rooftop, and a few other guests joined in, their eyes glinting with amusement. Claire set her glass down, her movements deliberate, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. "I was invited," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The man snorted, waving her off. "Invited? By who, the janitor?" The crowd roared, and Claire's hand paused on her tote bag, her fingers trembling just slightly before she turned and walked toward the railing. Downstairs, the gala was reaching its peak. The auctioneer's voice boomed, announcing a new painting. The cameras panned across the room, catching smiles and raised paddles. But something was shifting. A few guests started glancing toward the staircase as if they'd heard something. A rumor, maybe. A name. Claire Evans. Someone pulled out their phone, scrolling quickly. Another leaned toward a friend, whispering. The tech bro from earlier frowned, his smirk gone. "Wait, Evans. As in Bennett?" he muttered. His friend shrugged, but his eyes darted toward the rooftop. Claire didn't notice. She was still by the railing, her hands resting lightly on the cool metal. A server approached, offering her a glass of wine. She took it, thanked him quietly, and sipped. The city lights stretched out below, a reminder of how far she'd come from the world she'd grown up in. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, not as a thought, but as a memory. A dinner years ago, his hand on her shoulder telling her she didn't need to shout to be heard. She'd learned that lesson early. Too early, maybe? Her family's wealth had come with rules, discipline, dignity, restraint. She'd carried those rules into adulthood even when they made her a target. As Claire descended from the rooftop, a veteran philanthropist, her silver hair elegant and her presence commanding, caught sight of her near the staircase. She approached, her voice warm but firm. "Claire Evans," she said, extending a hand, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "I've followed your work with the foundation for years. Your contributions tonight are remarkable." The nearby influencers, still lingering with their phones, froze, their faces paling as the philanthropist continued. "The scholarship program you funded, it's changed lives. We're honored to have you here." Claire shook her hand, her expression soft but composed. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. The philanthropist smiled, then turned to the crowd, raising her voice slightly. "This woman is the heart of tonight's gala," she said, her words carrying across the room. The influencers scrambled to delete their earlier posts, their fingers shaking as the truth settled over the rooftop like a quiet storm. Back in the grand hall, the music cut. The crowd stirred, a low murmur spreading like wildfire. The double doors at the far end swung open and everyone stood their chairs, scraping against the floor. The governor walked in, his presence commanding, his smile practiced. But it was the man beside him who changed the room. Alexander Bennett in a sharp black tux, his face calm but his eyes sharp. The cameras turned, the crowd hushed. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Claire, who'd just descended the staircase from the rooftop. He walked straight toward her, ignoring the hands extended to him, the smiles thrown his way. He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I'm sorry I let you come alone," he said, his voice low just for her. "Are you okay?" Claire nodded, her fingers squeezing his for a moment. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Alexander turned to the microphone, his presence filling the room without effort. "Allow me to introduce Claire Evans," he said, his voice clear, steady. "Co-founder of the Bennett Foundation, my wife and the sole sponsor of tonight's $2 million gala." The room went dead silent. Margaret's glass slipped slightly in her hand. The woman in the Givenchy gown froze, her face pale. The tech bro choked on his drink, his eyes wide. Claire stood there, her blouse still wrinkled, her badge still pinned to her chest. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just looked out at the crowd, her eyes steady, her silence louder than any speech. The event coordinator, a woman with a clipboard and a panicked expression, was flipping through the guest list at the side of the room. "Claire Evans assigned to head table 1, she muttered, her voice shaking. A staffer nearby gasped, her hand over her mouth. She was washing dishes earlier. The words spread a ripple of shock moving through the staff. Brian, the logistics supervisor, stood frozen backstage, his clipboard limp in his hand. He'd yelled at her, ordered her around. And now the truth was sinking in. Moments later, a prominent journalist covering the gala, her press badge dangling from her neck, approached the event coordinator, her notebook open. "I just heard about Claire Evans," she said, her pen poised. "Is it true she was mistaken for staff?" The coordinator stammered, her face red, but before she could respond, the journalist's eyes narrowed. "I'm writing about this. The public needs to know how someone like her was treated." She turned away, already typing on her phone, her post on X going live within minutes. $1 million donor humiliated at Palm Springs Gala, forced to wash dishes. The notification pinged across the room and guests started checking their phones, their faces paling as the story spread. Alexander didn't let the moment linger. He pulled out his phone, his voice cold as he spoke to someone on the other end. "Terminate all contracts with tonight's event crew," he said, his words clipped. He turned to Claire, his expression softening. "You don't need to say a word," he told her. "Your silence taught them more than any speech ever could." Claire stepped to the podium, her tote bag still slung over her shoulder. The crowd watched, waiting for her to lash out, to call them out. But she didn't. "I didn't come here to prove anything," she said, her voice quiet but clear, carrying to the back of the room. "Only to see who's still worthy of our trust." The fallout was swift. Margaret's husband, the state senator, was quietly pulled from a major funding deal the next day. The woman in the Givenchy gown found her name trending online for all the wrong reasons, her sponsorships drying up overnight. The Tech Bros startup lost its biggest investor, a direct result of a leaked video from the gala capturing his smug comment about Claire. The woman in the red silk dress who'd mocked Claire by the painting was dropped from her charity board after her comments were quoted in the journalist's article. The influencer who'd filmed Claire on the rooftop deleted her post, but not before it was screenshotted and shared thousands of times, her followers turning on her. Headlines the next morning were brutal. The woman forced to wash glasses was the multi-million-dollar donor. The story spread like wildfire, shared across X, dissected on morning talk shows. But Claire didn't read them. She didn't need to. Later that night on the rooftop, the air was cooler, the city glowing below. Alexander stood beside Claire, his arm gently around her back. She held a glass of wine, her fingers loose around the stem. The string lights cast soft shadows across her face, and for the first time all night she smiled. Not a big smile, not a performance. Just a quiet curve of her lips, like she'd found something she'd been looking for. Some things speak loudest. In silence, she said, her voice soft, the desert wind carrying it away. The gala was over, but the moment lingered. For everyone who'd ever been looked down on, dismissed, or told they didn't belong, Claire's story was a quiet victory. A reminder that you don't need to shout to be heard. That dignity can be louder than cruelty. That truth in the end always finds a way. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.